Hello and welcome to Happy Hour with me. It is Eileen Cook, and it is September 18th. So I have on my schedule to sort of continue the discussion we had about conflict, only this time to talk about internal conflict. If anyone has other questions, deep or abiding issues they want to discuss, let me know and put those in the chat window, and we will add that to the discussion as we go. All right. So last time we talked about all the different sources of external conflict, but this week I think it'd be useful to kind of switch it and talk more of the internal stuff. Because I think, to be honest, with some exceptions, this is where most of us actually have the biggest struggles, particularly in real life. In fantasy life, there's a lot more Darth Vaders and troublesome things, but for most of us, there isn't someone deliberately thwarting what it is we're trying to do. It is the fact that we ourselves are having trouble doing those things. So it is a battle inside of yourself where you have different push and pull elements of what it is trying to do. So I think one of the ultimate things is, Don Moss is exercise from writing the Breakout novel, where he says, what is it that your character wants? Now, what is the opposite of that thing? Now, how can your characters want the same thing at the same time? So how many people want to have a great marriage or relationship and want to do whatever they want as they want to do it? We'll go with Alyssa on this one, who's just got married, so she can weigh in. But that is often the push-pull that's happening within a marriage, because you love having a partner, you love sharing your life with someone, but the downside is that someone then also wants their needs to be taken into account when you are making decisions and things like that, which may not always be your thing. You may really, really want to be more fit, and you really, really want the cookie. You want to put your family first, and you want to put your own passion first. So anyone who's struggled for time to find writing, all of that is talking about internal conflict. So I'm kind of curious, would anyone talk about something that was maybe a goal that you wanted to reach, whether that was write a book, own a home, graduate, and what kind of things got in the way of you achieving that? Did anyone ever struggle? Someone has struggled with that. Not
See, self-doubt is the biggest thing, right?
So
like just even
yeah. Give me an example. Like, what is something, and then where you let self-doubt get in the way of that?
well, it's I hate to reveal this, but I started writing this novel that's finally coming out. If I get the stupid thing back from the editors, I started writing it 20 years ago. I remember I have a, and I map it to sort of my son's birth, because I remember starting to do that. And it took me 15 years before I actually got to some kind of reasonable shape, because I had no idea what I was doing. And I had all kinds of doubt, and what the hell is this? And why should I be doing this? And so, if I'd had less of that, I might be talking to you from my yacht at this point. So.
And I appreciate that you would still take time to talk to us.
I would, yes. I would, yes.
So other people, we're going to put poor Tony on the counseling couch for a moment. What do people think that self-doubt was? What was it that got in the way? Does anyone want to get, I'll play. Okay, Bonnie, put him on the sofa. What is it? It's the relationship with his mother, isn't it?
No, actually, I was going to say, since I suffered the same thing, Tony, I had self-doubt that went in two directions. One was, what if I'm not good enough? And what do I think I'm doing? But the other one was, what if I'm really good? And then that's going to change my life, and I'm not ready for that. I like to go to the extremes.
I like that there's no in-between. I love that there's no in-between with that. Anyone else have thoughts on what might be going on? And here's the secret about counseling, in case you didn't know this. Counselors actually have no idea what's happening in your head. We're just tossing things out, and we're looking for people to have reactions to that. So I would definitely, if Tony was a counselor, I would say something like, were you ever afraid of what might happen if you were successful with that? Or the opposite that Bonnie was doing, are you afraid that if you put it out there, that it's better to have the dream where I write this book and it becomes a mega bestseller than it is to where I write a book and nothing happens with it. So I'd almost rather keep it as a dream.
Yeah.
And
So
then you
then
froze up. Yeah, there you are.
Oh, you froze on my end. What was I going to say? Oh, Tony, was part of it was what you were writing? Was it not fitting what you were imagining? Like, was the thing that you pictured yourself writing not quite matching what you actually saw on the page?
No, I just thought it was a shitty writer. Right? That's what the fuck am I doing? You know, I'm a computer guy. I can barely speak English, and it's my first language, let alone write it. Right? So that was probably my biggest, like, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I doing? You know, it's like, that was probably my biggest sort of self-doubt that I couldn't do this.
So here's an interesting question that, again, if poor Tony was on the sofa, that I might ask him. What if you tried to write it and you wrote it wrong? What would be, what's the risk of that?
I'd die a horrible death.
Okay,
flames, and everything would collapse.
Well, I'm glad it's nothing small. I appreciate that. Right. But people do go to something, right? There is something where it's like, and I think probably Lisa, like, are you afraid that you'd be humiliated, or that people would mock you? And again, what's interesting when you're a counselor is you toss that out and you might say that and someone might be like, no, that's not it. And then you have to draw, and then you do one of these. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can pause right in your notebook. That makes you sound smart. But what you're really trying to do is think of, like, okay, what else might be going on in this guy's head that would make him do that? I would also wonder about competing priorities. Like, one of the things when I talk a lot about what do people say and then listen to what isn't said is, Tony, you said, I can date this book to when my first son was born. Actually, your only son, I think.
Yeah.
Your first son, your only son.
Yeah.
To your knowledge.
That's right.
So that, when your only son was born. And so then certainly one of the things that I would be talking about was finding time for writing come at the expense of spending time with your children and your family. And so were there possible issues around, I can hold myself up in my office and write, but that's the time that maybe I should be spending with my brand new son or my son in junior high, or it's more important for me to go to my son's insert play, soccer game,
right,
whatever, than it is for me to be writing. Donna and I were actually talking this morning. We had a slumber party. And so we were talking this morning as we were getting up around that idea of sometimes feeling guilty about putting ourselves first and our craft first, because when you're starting, you're not making any money, right? So it's like, it would be one thing if I was making money. Then I would feel justified to spend this time on writing or conferences or having my own space. But since I'm not actually earning money yet, that's a waste of time. And that time should be spent on other things like doing home repairs or time with my family, those kinds of things. Did you want to weigh in on that, Tony, before I...
I think that family children stuff is way overrated.
Yeah, preach.
Actually, just funny enough, I found I wrote more after the kids were born because I left the house and I get an hour. So before the kids, I had long blocks of uncommitted time that I didn't complete anything. Once the kids were born, I'd go out for a coffee shop for an hour and I'd actually write a fair amount. But this is sort of I know that we're talking about internal conflict, but I found National Novel Writing Month kicked me in the head and showed me that I didn't have to spend 20 years to write a book, because I'd only be able to do 2 and then I die, right? So, because in 1 month I got 50,000 words and I went, holy shit. I was, I could be quite prolific if I actually set my mind to it. So that was a huge awakening for me.
Well, and I think thank you for that segue. Next time there'll be a slumber party and Tony can give me all the tips what we're going to talk about. But it's perfect segue into what I think is the true source of internal conflict, which is our value and belief structure. So we all have deeply held values that are basically fundamentally the beliefs or how we make sense of the world, right? So if one of your beliefs is it takes 10 years to write a novel, then you set yourself up for that and everything. Whereas if you switch that belief and you suddenly say, I think I could write a novel in a month or 2 months. If I really put the focus on it, I could do that. That changes how you approach the problem. And it changes how you feel that way. And I'm also just talking about values in terms of that's what drives our actions or beliefs. So one of the things that I would talk about in my family, one of the biggest values was honesty. And I can actually distinctly remember, I don't know how old I was, but pretty young. And I had been out running errands with my dad. And when my dad got home, he realized that he had been given, and I'm talking, I think it was a nickel in too much change from someplace, right? And he actually put me back in the car and we drove back to the store. And my dad's like, I think that you gave me too much change. And showed the cashier the thing and all this kind of stuff. And she, she thanked him or whatever. And we left. And I remember thinking, what a huge waste of our afternoon, because I could have been home playing or coloring or doing something more fun rather than going back to the store. But my dad was very adamant that once he knew that didn't belong to him, that he had to return it. The other thing that I distinctly remember in terms of, because it's one of only 2 times that I was ever spanked. So I was very, very little, and I was out in front of our house, and I was floating orange peels in the gutter in front of our house after like a heavy rain. And before you feel too sad for me, I had actual toys. I'm not sure why I was playing with organic trash in a gutter. There wasn't cable, so I do want to put that out there. It wasn't like there was better TV options. But anyway, I was out there floating, and I would, put down the peel and then watch it dash to the end and then get sucked down by the storm drain. And my dad pulled into our driveway, and I was not allowed to play near the street. This was before helicoptering parenting, so my parents just told me that and then sent me outside. So nobody was actually watching me. And again, I'm pretty sure I was fairly little, like enough where you would worry about them crouching down by a gutter near the street. I wasn't like a teenager at this point. And my dad came into the house and he said, was that you that I saw out by the end of the driveway? And I was young enough that I didn't know that parents can actually lie, right? So I thought, if dad is asking it as a question, then possibly he doesn't know that it's me. So I was like, no, wasn't me. Has anyone seen the, is it Maple Hills Farm thing where it's a bunch of kids getting into trouble? Like, is that you who made the mess? Is that you who got out the paints? And it's all these little kids who are like, no. So that was me. So I was like, no, it wasn't me. And then my dad's like, I know it was you. I saw it was you, which was really why did you ask it as a question? But I ended up getting paddled, not for playing by the street, but because I had lied about playing it as a street. So it is ingrained with me to the point that I feel horrible if I lie, and I'm really, really bad at it. I have told the story before. I was once coming through customs. I'd been in the States, and this will shock people, but I bought a really nice pair of shoes when I was down there, and I actually wore them home. So, and this was in the days where you still had to fill out the card when you came in. And I forgot to declare that I had bought the shoes. I completely forgot about it. So we had turned in our card and we were picking up luggage. Hang on, there's going to be a squeaky toy incident. No, we're not. We're just going to remove that temptation. So I got through customs and I was sitting there, and one of the customs officials came up to me and she goes, oh, that's a really nice pair of shoes. I like them. Where'd you get them? And I looked down at my feet and I realized I hadn't declared them. And I panicked. So instead of telling the truth, which is I got them like, and I don't know why, but I suddenly started to lie and I couldn't stop. So I was like, these shoes, I had them forever. I've had these shoes. I don't remember how long I've had these shoes, thousands of years. I got them in Metrotown. You know, when you go into Metrotown, there's I always get lost. Anyone else get lost when they go into Metrotown? It's like 5 different entrances. So I went into the one and there's the shoe store. I can't remember what it's called. Does anyone remember what it's called? It's like right there by the fountain, like right when you come in before the food court, and I got them there. They were $175. I remember and I bought them here in Canada like years ago. And I just couldn't stop lying. And Bob at the time was looking at me and he was like, I'm pretty sure she thought I was on drugs, which is why I myself will never have a life of crime, because I am not a. If I had to lie for a particular reason, I'm unstable.
Yeah. Well, we knew that.
Okay. Yeah. Everyone knows that I'm unstable. Just every so often the computer room allows me a moment to pause and think about it while it says on the screen, you are unstable. So there have been times in my life where I have lied, whether there might even be a good reason for it. But I feel awkward when I'm doing it, and it causes internal conflict for me. Particularly if there might be 2 values that might be jettisoned against each other. So another value that's very important to me is kindness. So if I was at a point where I had to say something to someone that I knew wasn't going to be kind, but it was honest, I will struggle with that to determine which value I think is more important. When I first started teaching writing and someone would say, do you think this is ready to send out? And I would be like, sure. If you love it, it looks great. And I had to realize that the value that was more important in that was honesty, that's what people were asking me for, was my honest opinion. So I would have to learn to value honesty above being kind in that situation. So that was something that for me, I ended up having to work on. So someone else, like the thing in Les Mis is the character Jean Valjean. He obviously values honesty and being a good person, but he will steal to survive. Right? If that's what he needs to do, he'll do it. So think about your character's values. In the book on conflict, which isn't written yet, although I'm looking at a draft, I'm going to come up with a nice tidy list of values for people to think about. Authenticity, adventure, balance, beauty, bravery, common sense, creativity, dignity, friendships, honesty, honor, kindness, loyalty, openness, optimism. Those are 2 different words. Like values don't have to be good. Like someone could value themselves above everything. Like I think we think value and we have the idea that it has to be a good value, but it's whatever that individual puts as a priority. Success is a great example. Thanks, Marianne. Where someone might be like, success and achievement is something that I highly, highly value. And if that is the case, that's fine. But if that comes at the cost of another value, that may be an issue, right? So my challenge to you is going to be to think about what are those values for your character? Like, what are the things that they hold as being really important? And is there a way that you can force them? Because we're such lovely sociopaths, is there a nice way that you can force them to be in a situation where they may have to act in conflict with their value, or put one value above the other, because that will drive their internal conflict. Does that make sense? All right, is anyone willing to volunteer what their character is and what their internal conflict might be? Or are you all going to stop? Thank you. I was like, don't stare at me blankly, people. Okay.
I'm happy to as well.
All right. So we're going to do Tony and then Bonnie.
So I'm writing with your slumber party lady, a female private investigator, and she was a former LA cop, and she's bisexual, and she's got a guy that really loves her, and she's tried to do that for a while, loves him too, but the domestic drudgery and the whole, soulmate thing just kind of drives her crazy, and she actually runs away. She goes to Paris for a couple of months because she just can't handle it. So, one side of the conflict is that this looks really good. It's, there's could be a family. This guy's actually got lots of money. Everything's sort of set up for her. And then the other part is that she just doesn't want to have any part of it. She's really conflicted that way.
And what sticks out for me is, well, one, if you could choose to love a guy with money versus choosing to love a guy without money, choose the guy with money. That would be my suggestion to her. But on the internal conflict is, to me, that drills down to the desire to be in a partnership and the desire to be independence, and valuing both of those things, and knowing that she's trying to see if there's a way to find a middle ground on those. And there will be in some areas, but in others there won't. Like, once you decide to be in a partnership and have a family, that means that you have to put yourself, at least at times, secondary to that. So I would be looking for ways where you can show her potentially, for example, seeing someone or seeing the benefit of being in a family, or having a great moment where she has this family connection, and then having it immediately contrasted with the opposite of that. So you don't have them together in Paris, but like Paris would be a great example, where you see people walking hand in hand, or they're discussing sharing, like, oh, you have to try a bite of this, it's amazing, right? And then you see the people who are having the thing like, if you make me spend one more minute in this museum, I'm going to kill you, right? Like, or I don't want to go shopping with you. I want to go sit in a cafe and watch people go by. And again, that may be something that you have to divide or conquer. So I'd be interested in showing that. But you seem like you actually have the internal conflict fairly well nailed. Do you feel like you do?
Yeah.
I mean, other values that I would think is, my hunch is duty and honor are fairly important to her. So I might look to see, like, if there's an opportunity where she has to go against something that she feels like, I should be like, that's the honorable thing to do, or that's the just thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you have, I've read a draft, obviously, of you and Donna's earlier book, where it's like, sometimes it's kind of fun. Like, she doesn't have to follow the rules in the same way that a cop does.
Yeah.
Which sometimes feels great, but if there was ever a time where she might feel bad about that, that would work. And my dog coughing something up on the rug is no indication of how your thing is going. All right, Bonnie Goldberg, what is your thoughts? Did we lose her?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself.
Okay. Phew.
Okay, so that's my character that I'm still working on. So she values family. She values she values her double identity, because it's kind of fun and it makes her kind of maybe special, and it's like a fun game. She values her, when I say family, like her place, like her actual family where she lives, like her situation. And what else does she value? I think she's unclear how, I mean, and she values the idea of being seen as an adult. Like, that's what she wants people to see her, as an adult. But not necessarily does she want to do the things that are required of an adult. Like, she has her own agenda about what that means.
So I would divide that out, because some of those I think are personality, like where she is, and some of those are values.
Okay.
Like, definitely I would say the idea of valuing family is a big one. And I would talk about maybe a sense of adventure. So I'm not sure that it's her dual identity that's important to her as much as it is the sense of adventure that she enjoys. And that shows up in that format.
Yeah, well, maybe adventure or independence. She likes to kind of, she values some kind of independence. Is, I think, really, when we think of even her as wanting to grow up, it's really she wants independence.
Yes. Right. And the value of independence, of course, comes with, you are then responsible for those decisions. This is why you will see some people, when we talk about emotional intelligence, we talk about some people are really strong in that area. And you'll meet other people. Have you ever been with someone who's like, I don't know, what restaurant do you want to go to? I'm fine with whatever. I always thought it would be a great business thing to have a restaurant called I Don't Care Where We Go. So that when someone says, where should we go? And someone says, I don't care, where should we go? That you would get all sorts of reservations. Feel free to use that. I'm not going to. So if you want to open a restaurant, start off with that. But for her, independence is also then going to come at a cost. So anytime that you can show she's independent, but that means she has to then abide by those decisions. Whereas when you let someone else take responsibility, you are not to blame.
Okay.
I was unstable there for a moment while Bonnie had her tongue out, which was fabulous for me to stare at with her looking at me like that. So thinking about those kinds of things, anytime you can take that kind of thing that there is important to them and then put that where they're wanting the other. So Leslie, you just chimed in the chat window. What's the conflict you just figured out?
Well, it's so perfect. And it was probably already laced in there. So my protagonist is, her husband's dead and his ghost keeps talking to her all the time. And she's starting to feel annoyed by that. And she's starting to, because she's always just done whatever he wanted. So now she's painted her bathroom gray. He didn't like gray, but she's like, she cut her hair. And then she's starting to fall in love with a new, and she likes that sense of autonomy. She's starting to fall in love with this new guy. And she's like, you know, wow, she's riddled with guilt because, wow, her husband's still talking to her. He's so amazing. And then the thing I figured out is that, does she want to take a chance of giving up that autonomy by being involved with another man who may step back into that role? So that's just perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I did nothing. And I think part of that I would also play with, and for sure, Kit, we'll go to you next, is the idea of she also values her previous marriage and she's valuing new love. And she kind of can't have both of those things in some ways. I mean, she can, because she can value her marriage for what it is, but she's going to have to let go of that relationship if she's going to fully embrace someone new. And that's going to come at a cost. And whether or not, I don't know if she would know this, but I certainly, if I was haunted by my dead husband, first off, it would be because I probably killed him. So that's the second issue why he would be haunting me. But if it was around missing him, I would wonder, if I fully love someone else, does that mean he's going to disappear? Is what keeps us together the love that we have? And if I then am loving someone else, apart from the fact that I feel bad that I'm with someone else and my husband is still around, does that mean I'm going to sever that forever? And part of her probably wants to, because it's time, and part of her probably doesn't. Kit, you had
I do. My protagonist has a bunch of internal conflicts, but the main two, I think, is the one about faith. So she's Irish Catholic, and she has a strong faith, and she was raised by convent school and nuns. Yet she's also, yeah, you too. She's also very sensible and pragmatic. So if I interview anybody about her and say, and when in my interviews, one of my favorite questions is, why didn't she become a nun, do you think? And they'll laugh out loud and say, oh, she's not nun-like, because she would be the first to say that, you reject the part of Catholicism that isn't pragmatic and sensible to you. And she was also a drinker, smoker, and a card player. So, so that also led to the laughter. But she was a strong Catholic and until the day she died. So that plays some conflict, I think, internal conflict.
Well, because she had to come to terms with, I mean, if you, having grown up Catholic, I can tell you that the Catholic Church does not tell you, like, just reject the parts of our religion that don't work for you. Like, that is very much not one of the official teachings, right? So it is around saying, I know better than the elders of the church. in this area for me. And that is not something, I mean, there's part of the reason the whole sex abuse scandal happened in the Catholic Church is you're raised to believe that the Catholic Church and the people within that church know best. To the point where you would, obviously go with all sorts of things that you shouldn't go with, just in terms of having that thing. I also have to tell you, I went to Catholic school for 12 years, and they used to have slumber parties at the convent where all the girls would be invited to spend Friday and Saturday night at the convent. And this one nun would do this whole talk, and it was titled, "It's Fun to Be a Nun." And Tony looks appalled. And they had this little song, and it was like, she would be like, if you like having slumber parties with your girlfriends, that's what being a nun is like all the time. Like, we're all here together. Like they were doing each other's hair and makeup in the evening or something. But it was like, see what fun it is. And I can vouch that most of us were like, nope. Nope. I remember also saying, and you don't ever have to worry about your hair, because this is back in the days where they still wore the habits. So you could just throw that habit on and go out the door, ladies. So I think one that's just exactly what I thought of when you gave your example is it's fun to be a nun. No, it's not really. But she is balancing faith, which is you believe what the religion tells you, with I choose to believe this part of my faith. And hold to that very strictly. And that will cause friction whenever you are doing something. And you will even see people like, I was raised very Catholic, and I would still say I'm Catholic in a cultural sense. Like, I identify that just in some ways. Some people who are Jewish will talk about, like, I'm culturally Jewish. I'm not just spiritually Jewish anymore. But I identify with all the rituals and all of the things. Like, that's what I know. But I don't certainly anymore, adhere to the faith in the way that I was raised with it. I don't attend church anymore, any of those kinds of things. But when something comes up that goes against anything that is the tenets of that faith, I definitely still have a moment of feeling uncomfortable. Some of those get burned out. And like, I don't have any difficulty with, for example, someone who might say that they were gay, lesbian, or bi. Where the Catholic Church obviously still is dealing with some issues around that. Like, I don't have any friction in my head about that at all. But there are other things, if the Catholic Church comes out against it, I find that I still have a friction point. And that's really fundamentally what conflict is friction.
I find that it's been really hard to write her character and to be gentle with that friction. It shows up also in she was a teacher she was one of the lay teachers and with nuns, and the nuns were hitting people for discipline, and she didn't believe in that. And I don't want to put a real heavy on the nuns, but I also want to explain in my story that she felt very differently. It's a little bit hard without sort of crapping over other people. And
I think it's about thinking about it. So if you need another example, when I was growing up in Catholic school, if we misbehaved, you had to kneel on rice because it hurts, right? Like a mofo. And then depending on how bad you were, you also had to extend your arms, and they would put a Bible in each hand, and you had to hold them while kneeling on rice. So your hands would, like, your arms would start to shake. And if you started to, the sister would be like, are you going to drop the word of God? Are you going to let Jesus down again the way you did a minute ago when you did this other thing? You'd be like, I don't want to let Jesus down. So you'd be holding on and shaking, your little arm shaking. Abuse. It was a beautiful thing. But clearly, I mean, with the exception of a few who I'm pretty sure were sadists, the idea was that we were building character. And I can tell you, like, this whole idea, like, are you letting Jesus down? And like, I remember thinking, like, I failed in something. Like, if like you cheated, for example, that stuck with me in a way that, again, I would argue is probably not a healthy way to have taught that lesson. I'm not suggesting you try it with your own children. Although, hey, you're a parent, do whatever you want to do. But they truly believed that they were making us into better people. Mm-hmm. I was really excited. I read an interview with a fellow who has a book coming out called Nottingham. And I'm very interested to read it. And it is the story of Robin Hood told from the sheriff's perspective. So the sheriff of Nottingham is always portrayed as, this horrible person who was collecting these taxes and, was horrible to the people who lived in the town. And so the person who's writing, it's like, let's just have a moment and realize, one, he wasn't setting the taxes. He was a government worker whose job it was to collect the taxes. And those taxes would have been to do things like keep schools open, hygiene, like all those kinds of things. And really, when you start thinking of it that way, Robin Hood and his band of merry men are kind of terrorists. Like if you had someone now who is like, I'm going to break into, the government coffers and empty the tax revenue, and instead of it going to whatever, I'm going to give it back to the people. You'd be like, well, that's nice, but we still have costs.
You're unstable again.
I froze up again. I'm so unstable. And Tellus actually tells me that I am stable, and they lie. But I think I'm very interested to read the book, because it is the idea of taking something that we always accepted, that Robin Hood is the best guy because he's helping everyone, and saying, is he really the best guy? Because he's giving the money to who he chooses to give it to. He's not necessarily equally distributing this money. So is he a good guy, or is it that, in fact, Robin Hood's a terrorist and Nottingham is the good guy?
That's like the Wizard of Oz. It's the story about the girl that goes to a new place, kills the first person she sees, and then goes on to kill again.
Yeah, like it's a very different description of that, right? And Wicked, which obviously became a huge success, is that idea of, I grew up in that time frame of watching The Wizard of Oz, and I was terrified of the flying monkeys, like you can't even imagine, right? But she's seen as this horrible, horrible person. And then in Wicked explores, like, what would it be like to grow up where you looked so fundamentally different, which is what Elspeth, who is the Wicked Witch, is, and how is she treated? And then you have a situation where all of a sudden, this girl lands her house on your sister, kills her, takes your dead sister's shoes, right? Like that's pretty rude. And then dances off down the road, right? Like it's a very different story seen that way. And so I very much agree with Alyssa's comment, and I'm going to butcher this. Maleficent. I can never say her name right. It's like Penelope.
Maleficent. That's how they say it in the movie.
Maleficent. It's sort of like I used to call Penelope for years because I pronounced it wrong in my head, and I just asked Alyssa how much I still struggle with her name. I always have to pause, and I'm like, it's Melissa without the M. Melissa without the N. Still working on that. But it's a very different story, and I would agree. I like her story better than Sleeping Beauty's story. But it is that idea of seeing things from an opposite or different perspective. So your character holds something in value, but what they hold in value may not actually be correct. So looking at your opposing characters and figuring out what do they value. And again, sometimes even when you have these characters who are like, mwah, ha, 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 I'm going to destroy this entire city. Sometimes they're doing it because no one is paying attention to the earth. And so I'm going to do this thing which is going to destroy 1/3 of humanity, but the planet will live longer, and we should respect the planet and the wild animals on it, and the fact that humanity is actually overrunning the planet and stripping of its resources. I'm going to unleash this biological weapon so that 1/3 of humanity dies off. I'm not saying you should do this by any stretch of the imagination, but it's an interesting argument to make. And you could argue that what they're putting as a value is more important than someone else's. My dad used to tell a story because he was in the military, and they would talk about, there's something called a belay gun. Has anyone ever heard of this? It shows up in some World War II movies. So what it is it's where you have to get basically a charge to a very far place, and it's too far to throw it. So what they will do is I will say, and I'm doing this just in random, I am the sergeant. I will say, Kit, we're under fire. We need to get this belay gun. So you're going to take this piece of it and you're going to run towards that basically machine gun nest until you get shot. So you're going to run as far as you can with this piece of the gun until you get shot. I'm like, okay, good job, Kit. Next up is Alyssa, who's going to be like, you pronounced my name wrong. So she's probably talking to someone else. But it's then Alyssa's job to take the next piece of the gun and run as far as she can, hopefully connecting to Kit's piece of the gun to connect them. And then when she almost invariably is shot, unfortunately, we're down to Bonnie. Sorry, Dragon Bonnie. And then she's going to do it. So I am valuing as a sergeant the fact that we have to blow up this machine gun nest and what that means in terms of the battle, that we have to take this land in, because if we don't take out this machine gun nest, then all these other things are going to happen over the life of people that I have served with and fought with, and no doubt I consider friends. So you can argue that that is the higher cause, or you can argue that I'm a sociopath. Right? Is the biological weapon to save the planet any different? If I feel like in the end, I'm actually saving the planet and the people who will be on it. Again, I am not in any way trying to make the argument that you guys should release a biological weapon. I'm trying to raise the argument that your bad guy probably does not think they are the bad guy. They think there is something that they are valuing that is as important or potentially more important than what your character sees. Tony, were you going to weigh in?
No.
Oh, you just looked like you had something smart to say, but apparently that was wrong.
Well, that's, yeah, that once a day that happens and the time is gone.
That time has come and gone. So thinking about your characters and even thinking and again, it's a horrible, but putting yourself in the position of someone who is so clearly wrong, but in some way they are thinking that what they're doing is the right thing. So look in Canada, when we had the internment camps for the Japanese. That goes against, and I can say this as a new Canadian, that goes against every single value that Canada holds dear. But it was during a time of war. And it was this thing that, well, if we don't, we could potentially be at risk. Now, let's ignore the racism that we didn't have a camp for people who came from a German descent for a moment. But what was truly believed was we are doing the right thing. And in the end, that will make sense because we'll be more likely to win the war quickly. And it's very important that we win the war because we got to beat Hitler. Obviously, that's the worst thing. But what we were doing was wrong. So setting up a story where you have people who have that fundamental friction. I believe A, but I also maybe believe Y, or something is putting me in a situation. I believe in duty and honor, and I am a part of a regime. This is the whole idea is I was only doing what I was told to do. Defense that comes up again and again, and that we struggle with, and that I think on an individual level, people struggle with. Marianne, you had a thought. You're muted.
Yeah, no, I just was wondering if I can throw out my protagonist's situation and just deconstruct it a little bit. It's complicated, naturally. But so my protagonist is a lawyer who wants to be successful and acknowledged for her success, but she believes in doing that by following rules and doing the right thing in an orderly fashion, which means following the letter of the law and managing all of that through the tools that the law provides. Okay. And she believes that people who are unruly or unorderly are in some ways breaking laws or disrupting order. So people who fight for what's right through public protests and conflict, like open conflict, are wrong on some level. And she believes that because of the way that she believes her father, who claimed to be championing the rights of the underdogs of society, turned out to be corrupt and self-serving, and therefore that reinforces or created, first of all, that idea in her mind that that's not how you do the right thing. So in my story, I've put her in a situation where she's trying to help the helpless by doing the right thing, but it turns out that her methods aren't going to work because the orderly, law-abiding channels have been corrupted, and she is put in a position where she has to team up with someone who is more radical and wants to achieve the right ends through disorderly and possibly unlawful means. So anyway, I don't know if that's excessively wordy, but the point is that she has a belief system that her current circumstances undermines, so she has to change the way she problem solves and accept a thing that she had previously rejected.
So first off, kudos, because you're putting her in a great situation. And I'm just going to take a real world example right now. When you look at the Hong Kong protests that are going on. So the Hong Kong protests are very much about obviously democracy and various things that are going on with that. But I can also see for someone saying, yeah, but they're shutting down public transit, there's fighting in the streets, there's all these things that are happening. I'm a business person. I can't feed my family if tourists can't get into the country, or they don't want to come to the country because there are these protests. So those protests come at a cost. And of course, then you can also layer in, whenever you have those protests, there's somebody who feels like, you know, what I'm going to do is break windows at the Gap, and somehow that will make my point. That Donald Trump's an idiot. So those things also then all kind of come into play. So she's right to value order, right? And she's also right to understand that sometimes the only way that you change things is through disruption. That's what she's having to figure out. And that's going to be a very bumpy thing for her to do. And so I would be wanting to put her in positions where, and I'm hijacking your thing, but like, okay, I'm going to go on a protest because, yeah, I don't necessarily agree with this, but we're going to do this protest march and shut down the street in front of this building, and then have one of the other protesters throw a shopping cart through the window, where all of a sudden she now feels a part of something that is way different than what she wanted to do. So I would be wanting to push her where when she does take a step towards doing something that's unruly, it goes much further than she would have wanted it to go. Does anyone else have any thoughts or want to weigh in and have an idea of how Marianne could up that ante? I'd be interested if somebody else got hurt through the part of protesting, because you talk about her wanting to help people and people in a bad situation, that if one of those people ends up somehow getting hurt by the nature of this unruly protest, that would be interesting to me.
Interesting, because I think I approached it the other way around so far anyway, in that she has discovered that her methods, which are the safe and orderly methods, aren't going to work because other people don't necessarily follow the rules. So all those sorts of law-abiding, you know, meetings and discussions and agreements and contracts aren't worth the paper they're written on because people are corrupt. And so she can't, and also that her father, who she thought betrayed her, was scapegoated by someone like that. So the only way to get justice is to expose that person and his corrupt circles. And so she feels that sticking to her methods isn't going to achieve those ends.
And I think I would want to attack it from both sides. So I would want her trying her normal, you like how I have to act this out like we're in a puppet theater? I would have her act out and be doing things where she's trying to follow her typical ways and they're failing. And then I would have her trying sometimes some of these new, more radical ways, But sometimes I would have her, just when she's starting to think, maybe I do need to tip more to this puppet, that something goes wrong that makes her think, oh shit, like that was not what I wanted to do. I should have stayed with this thing. Because again, you know me, I don't want change to be easy. Like I don't ever want a character to be like, I'm trying this, it's not working, so I'll try this, and oh, that was the answer to the solution. Leslie just had an epiphany about something.
Well, until she unmutes,
I could beef it up because I had one situation where there was a little kerfuffle at City Hall and the press got involved and it went sideways, and it made her feel justified in pursuing her usual methods. And then there's another sort of critical situation near the crisis point of the story where she actually is attacked.
Yeah.
She's physically in danger because of the fact that she's pursuing justice
the other way. Now, hang on, I want to chime in because Bonnie had a thought for your story.
it wasn't a thought for Marian's story. I'm sorry. It was just it was a kind of a meta question. So one of the things I struggle with internal conflict is that it ends up in mine is in first person. So it ends up a lot of like interior thought, which is boring after a while. So I guess what I'm trying to kind of understand is that you kind of set the character up with these values early on so that that's clear and that there's no way to mistake that. And then you're using external circumstances to create these internal conflicts. So you don't have to constantly be going inside the character's head going, oh, but I thought that I can't do that because of this, or this isn't what I thought it was to be an adult, or something like that.
Yeah, I would be playing with some external things, or, I mean, one of the things that can work really well is having another character challenge that, right? So if you have a belief structure, we'll use Marianne's as an example, right? So you have a character who's like, well, you follow the order, and having someone else be like, yeah, I followed the order. I did this, this, and this, and it never worked. Then I did this radical thing, and that's how it changed, where that person then has to be like, okay, that doesn't fit with what I know. That changes. Maybe it doesn't change right away. It almost certainly doesn't, but it will change. If you've ever had sort of a long, internal belief that you've had shift, it takes a long time because basically you're confronted with new information and you're trying to then make it fit. That's what's often called, like, you'll hear the term cognitive dissonance, which is the idea of people trying to deal with two opposite things in their head, and some people will reject it. That's why a lot of people will not even acknowledge, like, well, that must be fake news, because they know if they really start to think about it, that means what I'm thinking about might be incorrect. And it takes a long time. My dad, for example, who grew up in the Midwest, is very like, climate change isn't real. There's always been changes in climate. There's nothing going on with that. And I am slowly trying to change his point of view with that. And it's just bringing up different information, bringing it up. And I suspect I'm doing it as an external person, Bonnie. So that provides a way to have that debate that's not internal. But I suspect later he is going back and thinking about some of those things, or possibly noticing something that he wouldn't have noticed before that he might have rejected. So that may help. Other thoughts? Questions? All right. Well, we are basically at our time. Like, the hour, she does fly by. Alyssa.
Can you talk a little bit more about this Sisters in Crime thing this evening?
I would be happy to. Sisters in Crime, so that is, obviously, it's a separate organization. So they had approached me about wanting to do an hour-long talk on building characters. So I will be actually talking about, for Leslie and Bonnie, who will be there, I'm going to talk about sort of what writers can learn from counselors. Or, if you happen to have read an advanced reading copy of my book, you may know some of the things I'm going to discuss, but it's around the character interview and those kinds of things. And it will be online from 7 to 8. So any of you guys are welcome to come. Sisters in Crime had to get an invite, but it's a special Zoom room too, which I will repost again, but so people have it, because we're not giving them our secret Zoom room. Yes, Kit.
I have one quick question. I think it was Bonnie, I don't remember who mentioned the word meta. And I, in my new website that I'm building, I wanted to write some blog posts of the process of writing this book, the weird, wild things that have happened to me, in a first person, in a blog kind of way, with photos that I won't necessarily include in my book. Is that called, you guys might know this, is that called a meta book?
While we all ponder on that for a minute. Feel free to chime in. I don't know if I would call it a meta book.
What's the word meta really mean, I guess?
Oh, now we're going to, like, Bonnie, you were the one who mentioned, I think.
Just like at the outside level, like above the actual thing itself. Like,
Right.
So would you describe what she's talking about as a meta book?
I don't know, say it again.
It's a book about the writing of the book.
Well, that could be
The writing of a book.
that could be yes. I mean, it would be there's metafiction, so yes, that would be kind of that. So I just looked at a definition referring to itself or to the conventions of its genre, self-referential.
Yeah, I mean, meta is thinking about thinking.
Have you ever seen Lady
That's
of the
good. Thinking
Water,
about
or whatever
thinking.
it's called, by M. Night Shyamalan? That guy? It's really interesting because he explicitly references story structural elements and archetypes and stuff. The characters actually talk about stuff at points in the story, so it's meta in that sense.
I mean, I guess the question is how you want to use it, and I'm timing into here where Alyssa's saying it's an obscure term. Like, I would be more likely to think of them as like DVD extras. Like, I don't think of Lord of the Rings. Like, I loved that whole movie series, and I bought all the DVDs when they came out, and it was like everything on how the costuming is and how they did all this and the story behind all of this. I loved that, but if they had said the meta story of Lord of the Rings, I don't know if I would have been interested in it. It sounded.
I'm not sure I would use it that way, though, necessarily.
Yeah. Not
I would look at the, like when I did, when I've done things to promote my book, like they always want extra information about the book that you have to somehow come up with for blog tours and crap.
What's your real perspective on that, Elisa? Yeah, okay.
It's really exhausting doing blog tours and stuff. I don't even know if it actually paid off, but they want you to do that. They used to want you to do that kind of stuff. And all those little stories were what would be like helpful insider information that you would save for those kinds of things. So you could certainly blog about it, but I wouldn't call it meta. Meta to me is like a meta tag, which is like a,
I would think of inside information behind the scenes of the making of. Some of those I would probably be more likely to use.
I do have a title, so it could be Ordinary Mary. What did you say? Behind the scenes or extra or something?
Behind the scenes. Yeah. The making of.
Making of. I like that.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you all go. I will talk to you soon. And if you have anything you want to have discussed in an office hours, send me an email and I will make it happen. And whatever your epiphany was, Leslie, I'm glad you had it.
It was good. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.